morning. Welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit 2019. I'd like to know what your expectations are of the summit.
Okay, so first of all, I think the topic is very important. For so long a time, we've been discovering oil and gas resources in Africa. We have three main strands, if I can put it. The first one is that most of these discoveries are normally done by foreign-owned companies. So that is the first one. The second is that though we are discovering more, people still perceive that we are not benefiting from the resources. One, because of probably a poorly designed fiscal regime, and another because of maybe the non-effective implementation of local content policies. So what I expect is that we're able to address all these three issues. First, how do we build capacity of local companies, not just state-owned companies, but private sector, indigenous African companies, to compete, to be able to discover new resources. Two, how do we design fiscal regime going forward to make sure that one, the take is more, and two, apart from just the revenues, we also get other additions, including technology transfer and so many other things that are included in the fiscal regime. And the third one is that we design and implement country-specific, realistic local content policies.
Thank you so much. Kindly introduce yourself.
My name is Ishmael Aka. I work with the Energy Commission.
Thank you so much, Dr. Aka. It's a pleasure to have you around. Hello, it's an honor to have Dr. Juliet Chimesi-Anoche with us as the host for the Africa Oil Governance Summit 2019. Dr. Juliet, kindly let me know what your expectations are of this summit.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joanne, for having me once again. It's an honor and a privilege to be here again. As usual, I'm very excited. This year, the theme is different. This year, we're looking at optimizing our oil and gas resources. You have a fantastic panel for both days. So I'm hoping that by the end of the two sessions, we will have moved further along in how to develop our resources. It's one thing to make the discoveries, it's another thing to also move the discoveries to another level. So I'm hoping that in course of the 2 days, we're going to have a lot of discussions, conversations about this issue, and we will all go away with action points on how we can ensure that Africa's oil and gas resources are optimized for long-time benefit.
Thank you so much, Dr. Juliet. We'll talk some more later. Hi, welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit. My name is Joanne. Kindly introduce yourself.
My name is Nader Khalifa, petroleum economist from the Ministry of Energy and Mining, Sudan.
Great. It's a pleasure to have you. What are your expectations for this year's summit?
It's my first time to be here, and I have high expectations, especially with the topics in the panel, and interested to know different aspects and different experiences from different governments in Africa, and their different views regarding the empowerment of youth and women.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk some more later. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit. My name is Joanne Saki. Please introduce yourself and tell us your expectations for the summit.
Thank you, Zoret. My name is Aïda Diop. I'm the president of Women in Mining Senegal, and my expectation is to learn about as a country and as a government to how we can do to have a good success in oil and gas governance in Africa, and how to translate this to our country and how to adapt it the new model or sharing experience, the successful and the fair rule in oil and gas government to bring our country develop it.
Thank you so much.
And to how women can participate more and more in the oil and gas governments.
That's great. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to have you. Bonjour. Présentez-vous et quelles sont vos attentes?
Bonjour. Je m'appelle Madame Ndiaye Aïda Diop. Je suis la présidente de Women in Mining Sénégal. Et par rapport à nos attentes, c'est aujourd'hui d'apprendre les meilleures pratiques, par exemple, de la gouvernance de oil and gas en Afrique. C'est-à-dire aussi voir quels sont les succès et quelles sont aussi les erreurs à éviter pour pouvoir apprendre de ces leçons-là et les implémenter dans nos pays respectifs tout en essayant de les adapter au contexte local. Mais aussi en tant que représentante d'une organisation de femmes, voir comment en tout cas les femmes pourraient participer effectivement dans la gouvernance du pétrole et du gaz. Donc une participation effective des femmes dans la gouvernance.
Merci beaucoup. Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit. Kindly let me know what your expectations are of the summit.
Yeah, look.
Introduce yourself to.
Oh, sure. I'm Dawn Anderson from Oxfam in Australia. My expectations are low in that I'm really hopeful that what needs to happens. But I think for me, governance is probably the pivotal issue when we talk about extractives in Africa. And so being somewhere where we get to actually dive deep into what that means is really significant. So if there's a sense going out of here a bit more collectively for the continent around where to take that, that's probably my low expectation.
That's a good expectation. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to have you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you at the Africa Oil Governance Summit. Please introduce yourself and let's know your expectations for the summit.
My name is Gunnar Holm. I'm the ambassador of Norway to Ghana, and I'm very happy to be here today. I think governance is the key word when it comes to the petroleum industry and petroleum production. You need governance in every level to include for openness and transparency and to utilize the enormous resources for the benefit of everybody.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. It's a pleasure to have you. Hello, good morning. It's a pleasure to have you at the Africa Oil Governance Summit. Tell us who you are and what your expectations are for the summit.
So my name is Francis Abere. I work with Oxfam. I lead our work on extractives. Today for me marks a very important milestone, for the governance of oil and gas. And what I basically would want to get a fair sense of is the journey we have traveled since 2015 when this first started. What would be the benefits, that we can reap over time, but most importantly, the new, discoveries that we are seeing in the frontier communities across Africa. What, key lessons will be important for them to take from us, but also for us, what we can learn from them, as newbies on the block. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you. Enjoy. Hello, good morning. You're welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit. Please introduce yourself and tell us your expectations of the summit.
Yeah, my name is Salomon Nuna. I'm from Tanzania, Government of United Republic of Tanzania, Ministry of Energy. Well, this is my second time to be here. And the expectations and our hope will always be the same, is to share the knowledge experience with the audience, with the panelists, and I'm going to be part of the panelists, and I'll be discussing the issue of security and investment in oil and gas. So I expected to share some good experience, especially on what we are doing in Tanzania and what we are doing between Tanzania and Uganda, and big and largest oil pipeline project that we are currently working on. So I expect to share that experience, but also expecting people to come up and have some discussion so we can share some little challenges around. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Hello, you're welcome to the Africa Oil Governance Summit. Tell us your name and your expectations of the summit.
My name is Jeffrey Boedu, and I'm representing Trading House Africa. So we are basically into renewable energy here in Africa. And I believe that today my expectation is quite positive. I believe that such events, it's going to bring together all stakeholders so that there can be a richer consensus on how to develop, our industry, and especially the gas industry itself. Because, of course, out of the 12% of the world reserve that is drilled from Africa, only 1/3 out of it is refined. So I believe that opportunities of this nature, given the various companies, the various institutions and stakeholders to reach a voice, and then looking at how we can basically look at improving the oil and gas industry in Africa. So I'm quite positive about this event, and I hope that at the end of the event, we'll all be living here with smiling faces. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I like your expectations. Enjoy. Good morning, Mr. Boache. It's not every day I'll get to interview my boss. This is a pleasure and an honor. Can you let us know what your expectations are for the summit?
No, this is our flagship program. and we are happy and excited to see people coming from all over the region and also from America, Asia, and now from Australia, to join us, think through the issues that confront us as Africans with respect to oil and gas. So I expect dialogue. I expect that people will be frank with each other and confront the challenges that we have to prefer solutions that will help Africa transition from being described, as a continent cursed, with oil, to be a blessing for us. So that is why I expect we have fun and be frank about the issues that we have to converse about.
Thank you so much, Mr. White.
Oh, can we have a round of applause for the wonderful male a cappella group? It's no mean feat to be able to sing in tune. So when you see a bunch of men singing first thing on a Tuesday morning or in tune, I think we need to appreciate that. Since a lot of you were sitting down, those who have just sat down, can we have another round of applause again as they go out, as we appreciate them, Thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and as we say in Ghana, Akwaba. Accra, once again, is that time of the year for the ACEP summit. This is what I call a truly African summit. Thank you. Those of you using the translators, number 1 is English and number 2 is French, so that you can follow the proceedings of today. So let me start again. Akwaba, which is welcome. To all of you, to the Truly African Summit. I say it's a Truly African Summit because if you look at the lineup of who is coming for the next couple of days, you will actually see that Africa is well and truly represented. I want to take this opportunity to thank ACEP for the opportunity to be what I call the ringmaster for the next 2 days. And as you know, what do ringmasters do? Ringmasters keep order and ensure that everything goes according to time and according to proceedings. My name is Juliet Chumesi Anoche, and I'm going to very quickly introduce the chairman for today's proceedings. And as the chairman comes up, you will see that once again, ACEP has pulled out all stops to ensure that they get the right personalities to be here to address us. The theme for this year is optimizing our oil and gas resources, and I'm sure you all agree with me that after about 10 years of massive discoveries around Africa, it's about time we start having a conversation as to what we do with those resources that we have found. So that is what today and tomorrow is going to be about. To chair this very august occasion, and I'm very excited that the chairman is a woman. The Honourable Minister just spoke to me and said, oh, it's going to be fireworks, and I can promise him it's going to be worse than fireworks. Because we have another woman who has fire in her belly, who is going to be here for the next couple of days to steer proceedings. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take this opportunity to introduce to you our chairman for the next couple of days, Ms. Roslyn Kenya, MBE. And just a very brief, if you can please come up for me, ma'am, as I read your profile so that everyone knows who you are. Roslyn Kenya, MBE, is a trusted advisor to global companies on responsible business investment and partnerships in Africa. She has decades of experience in corporate and environmental law, government relations, political risk management, and sustainability. As an environmental lawyer for almost a decade, from the early 1980s, Roslyn advised international organizations and governments on environmental policy and legislation. She went on to become a corporate lawyer at the international law firm Linklater's, and after a corporate and commercial lawyer, and later a corporate and commercial lawyer and executive director at the De Beers Group. Prior to founding Kina Advisory in 2013, She was Vice President, External Affairs and CSR at Tullow Oil PLC. Rosalind is a member of the Bar of England and Wales. She is also a non-executive director for ACEP Energy and Cow Bank Limited. She's a vice chairperson of the Africa Gifted Foundation and also serves on the advisory board of Invest in Africa. In 2014, Rosalind was awarded an MBE for service to CSR for the benefit of youth in Africa. Recently, she was selected as one of the top 50 leading female professionals by Cranfield University. She was named in 2008 as one of Britain's most influential people of African and African Caribbean heritage by the Power List. In 2016, she was again named by Forbes Afrique magazine as one of the 100 influential women on the African continent. So ladies and gentlemen, you will agree with me that there is no better person to chair the proceedings like a woman with such an esteemed history and background. So I'm going to hand over to her as she takes us for the next session or so. And intermittently, I will be coming back, as I said, with my ringmaster cane out to keep order and to ensure everything goes according to plan. Madam Chair, you're welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Whenever I hear my biography read out, I feel quite daunted because there's a sort of expectation then raised that I'm not always sure that I fulfill, but I'll do my best today. Honourable Deputy Minister, Ambassador, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank ACEP for giving me the privilege, and I do consider it a privilege, to chair this summit. I have actually known ACEP since it was born in 2010, when one of its co-founders was our current Honourable Deputy Minister. And I recall my dealings with them when I was on the other side of the table at Tullow Oil. It wasn't always that easy. They weren't always this kind to me, inviting me to chair things. They asked very challenging questions and expected very challenging answers, and would not, I have to say, accept any PR type response. So if they asked a question about tax, I had to find a tax person to speak to the Deputy Minister. They were as tough advocates for citizens then as I believe they are today. And so for me, it is really something really special to be standing up here chairing this summit that they're organizing with others. And thank you all so much for coming. Our task here for the next day and a half is to think about how we effectively and efficiently optimize the oil and gas resources in Africa, particularly bearing in mind new discoveries that are coming on stream regularly. So first, we have to understand the size of that resource. At the end of 2017, from my research, it appears that Africa has 487.7 trillion cubic feet of proven gas reserves and 125 billion barrels of oil, worth around some $7 trillion at current prices. How that potential translates into real value for the average African citizen in any of our countries represented here is what should exercise our minds for the next day and a half. And I say this because we have a temptation when we are gathered in a forum like this, knowing as much as we do about our sector, to talk to each other, and to talk maybe sometimes too theoretically and too academically. I would rather we imagine that in this room sat a farmer, a mother of children in a village, a young person about to come out of university next year, wondering what work they have, what the future holds for them. And as we speak during our sessions and during plenaries, and including you, dear Honourable Deputy Minister, let's speak as addressing those people and answering those questions. So I've mentioned huge sums like trillion, reserves. We'll talk about exploration, appraisal, all these terms. A lot of these are not understood by the man, woman, and child out there. What they want to know is, how does this impact me? How does this give me the sort of education that I need to have an opportunity for the sort of job that can generate income for me to have the sort of choices that we in this room have? how can we use that resource and the revenues from that resource to ensure that people in this country and in other African countries represented here do not die from preventable diseases? How can we ensure that your young child who is looking out into the future and will need to have a job in 20 years' time, 30 years' time, not today, can be part of what is termed the fourth and possibly then the fifth industrial revolution? So for me, our success here, Benjamin, I know you want this amazing communique. Our success, if that communique can be picked up by an ordinary person, read and understood, and our question answered in their favor. So that's the first challenge. So firstly, in order to achieve this, I'm just throwing out some points and some questions. It's not my job to answer the questions. Fortunately today, I'm not presenting, just sharing. We have to get this oil and gas out of the ground, on land and under sea. That takes deep expertise and immense risk-taking. Even after you do all your research and tests and spend millions to drill wells, only 1 out of every 3 or 4 will give you oil that is worth producing commercially. So the question is, how then do we find or build that expertise and create the incentives for the people with the expertise to take that risk? Second, the world is changing, literally, every day. With climate change, for example, comes major changes in how the world sees hydrocarbons. For many people, oil is toxic. I've just been in London, which is where I live, and there has been, you might have heard about the Extinction Rebellion campaign, which impacted all of us, people sticking themselves to all sorts of things because they feel the government and the world is not doing enough on the climate change agenda. So we are seeing the so-called green shift, which means that there is a lot more investment in environmental safeguards. There's a higher cost of capital for developers who are developing hydrocarbons. There's higher social risk as companies face opposition to the activities. Now, we may think we in Africa are far removed from things like the recent Extinction Rebellion campaign I spoke about. But the developers here, the international developers that we are invited to come and develop our resources, have to answer to stakeholders in their home countries. How then do we set our own strategy rather let someone else's strategy happen to us? What does the rise in renewable energy mean for those of us that depend on hydrocarbon revenues at this time? Third, in that global context, how do we create the business and political environment for serious investors to help us achieve our industrialization agenda? And here I'm not just talking about oil and gas, I'm talking about the broad industrialization agenda. The type of investors who are willing to take long-term bets on our countries. Short-term political thinking does not bode well for a long-term investment in any sector, be it oil and gas, manufacturing, agriculture, or even the services industry. We need long-term investors. Many folk are willing to put their money into negative yielding bonds in Europe, believe it or not, rather than risk investing in Africa. How then do we get political rivals to prioritize the long-term benefit to our country, or even to themselves, by creating a safe space for such long-term investment? How do we create a legal and regulatory regime that creates shared value for citizens and for companies? How does government create the right boundaries within which business should work? Boundaries, not risk-bound constraints. We need to remember that Africa's oil and gas reserves, however huge they may sound to us, are still only about 7% of global reserves. So people have options in where they can invest. But more important, thinking over the broader economy and industrialization, the dollar, the single dollar, even dollars owned by us Africans, have choices about where to make its investment home. Above all, how do we use this resource to transform our socio-economic development? How do we turn oil from the Jubilee field into drinking water in Navrongo, in the north of our country here in Ghana? Where is the place of hydrocarbons in 10, 20, 30 years? That's within the lifetime of a lot of us here. What is the relation between Africa's oil and gas potential and our need to have digitalized economies? More broadly, How can hydrocarbons position us for the fourth industrial revolution and the fifth and sixth? How does it help agriculture, manufacturing, services, logistics, any other industry that is job creating and wealth creating? At the end of the day, we cannot depend on oil and gas or any extractive resource for a future that provides much needed social services and infrastructure and creates the quantity and quality of jobs needed for our young ones. We must turn it into sustainable development, as we've seen in countries such as Norway, and I'm sure the ambassador will share a bit of that with us. Our job here in this room over the next 2 days is to help align Africa's petroleum resource exploitation with the development of Africa's people. In a different guise, I'm facilitator of the first session, and this session is entitled Value Addition to Petroleum Resources, Extraction through Industrialization, the Possibilities and Challenges. So I'm going to invite the panelists up. So I would like to welcome Mr. Benjamin Boachi, the Executive Director of ACEP, to come and give a welcome address.
Thank you very much, Rosalind. We will help you deliver on this important role. But most importantly, to thank you for accepting to be here and to chair this conversation, which is important on ACEP's calendar. Honorable Minister and Deputy Minister, standing in for the Minister himself, Honorable Dr. Alhaji Mohammed Amin Adadam, Your Excellencies, the Ambassadors of Norway, Ambassador of Angola, members of the diplomatic community, members of Parliament present, government representatives from the region, friends from civil society, friends from business community who are also here with us, our friends from the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I am very excited to welcome you to the 5th Africa Oil Governance Summit. I am particularly happy to see participation from civil society, government, academia, and the business, the development community, individuals and groups from various segments of our society, including persons with disability who we continuously integrate into our work, recognizing that there is only a thin line between the able and the disabled. This is an important indication that together we are achieving the objective of the Africa Oil Governance Summit. For the past 5 years, we've been trying to foster a relationship among stakeholders to revise Africa's story on oil and gas. The history of oil and gas production shows that in many oil-rich African countries, the impact of the oil industry on national development is suboptimal. The oil curse has become a cliché because many oil and gas producing countries have failed to achieve economic growth, reduce poverty, and address inequality with the resources. To change this narrative requires active dialogue among all stakeholders, including business, governments, to build consensus, which this summit seeks to do, on the objectives of extracting the oil resources. However, within the parameters of engagement and dialogue as we have in today, we must be honest to critique one another without becoming enemies. It is a fact that we can't agree on everything. If we did, there would be an imminent danger of maintaining the status quo. Often when civil society have failed to be at the table, they have become like roaring lions. Because without our voices, we are lost in the power dynamics. The longer we stay at various corners throwing accusations, the more the time lost to achieving the needful. I believe if we unpack the reason why oil and gas has failed to be transformative in many African countries, all stakeholders will have a share of the blame. So why do we continue blaming one another rather than choosing to shape the story of our collective future? Madam Chair, for 5 years now, stakeholders have come from many different African countries, including Angola, Ghana, Congo, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Chad, Mozambique, Kenya, Morocco, Niger, Senegal, South Africa, Sierra Leone, Sudan, Tanzania, Tunisia, Uganda, and Zambia. We have also had participation from North America, Europe, and Asia, and this time we also have Australia represented. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, last year we had a very engaging conversation about local content. The challenge to effective local content development was summarized at the summit as low capacity levels of human resources and businesses, poor partnership culture among indigenous companies to create economies of scale, limited access to finance, and associated prohibitive cost of capital. Poor planning at integrating the oil and gas industry into the rest of Africa's productive sectors of the economies, and over-ambitious targets of local content requirements, coupled with poor coordination among countries to link industrialization and regional integration. To address these issues, the summit concluded that there are specific roles government, regulatory bodies, business community, the civil society groups can play to drive the localization agenda. Local content, therefore, was agreed that it is a shared responsibility. This year, we are focusing on strategies to integrate the growing oil and gas and the many discoveries made in the region in the last decade into Africa's development on the theme, optimizing oil and gas resources in Africa, the role of new discoveries in the continent development agenda. We take note of the many oil and gas discoveries that have been made, particularly in frontier countries such as Ghana, Kenya, Tanzania, Senegal, Uganda, and Mozambique, to assess how these new resources can catalyze development and align to regional agenda to place African countries among the best performers in global quality of life measures in 2063. And Madam Chair, I read that portion again. To place African countries among the best performers in global quality of life measures by 2063. This is challenging in the face of new evidence that inequality is on the rise, particularly in West Africa, where 30% of the population live under $2 a day, as captured in a recent report by Oxfam. However, the new discoveries have the potential to improve trade among African nations, provide jobs, generate revenue for social investment, and provide electricity for 2 out of 3, that is 70% of sub-Saharan Africans who still live without electricity. While we harness the opportunities, we must also pay attention to the challenges posed by potential transition to climate-sensitive technologies that are providing alternative to energy and oil and gas in particular. We are happy to have very diverse stakeholders at this year's summit to help provide the answers. I therefore urge you all to bring on board your rich expertise and experience to push the continent's development agenda forward. At the end of the summit, we are expected, through the development of a communique And to stress that, Madam Chair, we will make it as simple as possible so that the ordinary can appreciate what is in that communique. Come to a consensus on a strategy and measurable roadmap geared towards harnessing Africa's oil and gas resources in ways that meet the continent's industrialization and socio-economic transformation agenda. I will end by acknowledging the massive support provided by our partners who have remained committed to this cause and engagement to make the summit possible. In no particular order, because in development world we don't struggle for positions. We want to thank Oxfam, Ford Foundation, the Norwegian Agency for International Development, NORAD, and we're happy to see the ambassador here, Natural Resource Governance Institute, NRGI, and Open Site Initiative for West Africa, OSIWA. I would also like to say thank you to the Ministry of Energy and to the Minister for the collaborative support they have provided ACEP since the beginning of the Africa Oil Governance Summit. We hope that our relationship with our partners in the Ministry of Energy will be strengthened and sustained. I thank everyone for making it to the summit, particularly those who have traveled from far to be here. I understand the context and I can appreciate traveling within Africa. Sometimes it can be longer than coming from America. But you made it, and we're grateful for your participation. I look forward to an engaging conversation that will chart a path for our continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Benjamin Wache, who is the Executive Director of ACEP. Can we have another round of applause for him? For those of you who are not familiar with Ben, just very quickly before the next speaker comes up, Ben is an energy governance professional and Executive Director of ACEP, as I said. Prior to becoming the Executive Director, he served as the Deputy Executive Director, Programs Director, and Operations Director, managing the research unit and the programs unit. He has made contributions to extractive sector governance in Ghana and Africa, with much focus on corporate governance, institutional development, fiscal governance, contract governance, and evolution of legal framework for effective management of extractive resources. He has also consulted for the World Bank Group, UNDP, and many research institutions in the resource sector. He has delivered presentations at various international conferences on the extractive sector, particularly on revenue generation and expenditure. He works with host communities, analyzing the community's issues relative to the development of extractive projects and revenue distribution. He also has extensive experience on the power sector reforms. He currently chairs the Stakeholder Committee of the Millennium Development Authority, MIDA, advising the MIDA board on the implementation of the power sector reforms. Benjamin holds an MSc from the University of Dundee, UK, in Energy Studies, and a BA Honours in Sociology with Information Studies from the University of Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Benjamin Wache, who spoke. Another one of the Moving on very swiftly, our next address, we're going to take our next address from His Excellency Gunnar Andres Holm, who is the Ambassador of the Royal Norwegian Embassy in Ghana. Mr. Ambassador, if you can please come up. And as he comes up, I'll just read just a few brief words about His Excellency before he takes his seat. Gunnar Andres Holm is the current Norwegian ambassador to the Republic of Ghana. Prior to his appointment as the Norwegian ambassador to Ghana, he had served as Norwegian ambassador to South Sudan in 2016. Minister Councillor, Norwegian Embassy South Sudan, 2014 to 2016. Acting Special Envoy for South Sudan and Sudan, 2013 to 2014. Senior Advisor and Coordinator of the South Sudan Desk, 2011 to 2013. He's been Councillor, Royal Norwegian Embassy in Pretoria, South Africa, from 2008 to 2011. He was Senior Advisor, European Parliament, Section for EEA Financial Mechanism 2006 to 2008. Senior Advisor, Africa 1 Section, responsible for Ethiopia and Eritrea 2005 to 2006. Acting Assistant General, Section for East and Southern Africa 2005, among others. He has had an illustrious career, as you can see. He has over 20 years extensive experience in international diplomacy and foreign affairs, beginning in 1994 as a desk officer with Norway in Tanzania. Mr. Holm obtained a Cand. Polit. in social anthropology from the University of Oslo in 1988. His major interests are in the areas of international politics, with emphasis on peace and security, particularly on current African affairs, development issues, and rural development. Can we have another round of applause for an excellent
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Honorable Deputy Minister of Energy, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam, friends from ACEP, representatives from the industry, fellow members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and also thank you to the vocal group that sang so beautifully. Starting Tuesday morning with Usibiza is a very good way of starting the morning. Let me first thank ACEP for organizing this important event, the 5th Africa Oil Governance Summit. And I'm going to focus on one of those words, and that is governance, because here you have people from the oil industry, you have business people, you have people who understand geology and money. I don't understand that, but I know a little bit about governance and I know a little bit about politics. As you all know, ACEP is an important actor in the national discourse on petroleum and energy in Ghana. I'm very happy to say that we have been supporting you through NORAD and the very successful 10-year-old program called Oil for Development, same also with Oxfam and NRGI. Very pleased to be able to support institutions that provide that basis and contribute extensively to the national discourse on vital issues. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a cliche. People tell me sometimes it is, but I think it isn't, because it's a fact that petroleum as a natural resource belongs to the people of the nation. And that means it is in people's interest and right to know how this national resource is managed, the commercial and industrial aspect of it, and the revenue coming from the sector. My country, Norway, we have had an offshore oil and gas industry for close to 50 years. It has provided immense wealth to my country and developed the welfare society that we all benefit from today. We have learned many lessons during those 50 years. It was a whole new industry. We didn't know anything. We had to learn a new and extremely complex industry. We have made many mistakes, but we also learned how to manage these resources in such a way that it becomes an enormous asset and not a curse, as was already mentioned earlier. And as I said, ladies and gentlemen, governance is the key word that runs through these 50 years. An active public discourse, including media, civil society and academia. Governance in the sense of openness and transparency all the way through from exploration and bidding and production. The concession process. Governance in use and reporting of petroleum revenue, and openness and transparency on the environmental aspects of the industry. I could go on, but the main point is governance, in my view, opens up the full potential of this sector. And as the theme we have today, optimizing oil and gas resources in Africa, for me, governance is absolutely vital here. Governance stimulates debate, it leads to innovation and new technology to deal with the problematic aspects of petroleum production. And the previous speaker already mentioned that, the challenges that we have with the green shift, the way we look at oil and petroleum today. Oil spill and pollution, flaring and emissions, climate challenges, to name a few. Governance also serves as a key factor in managing the revenue in a sustainable way. And we have seen what could happen if you don't do that. I mean, Dutch disease is a well-known term. We have other countries where you see the expenses or rather the expenses of the state and the price of oil being so close together that when the oil price collapses, the whole economy collapses. I won't name any names, countries there, but you know who I might be talking to recently. Ladies and gentlemen, governance and public discourse is, as I said, absolutely vital for key factors for the industry as well. And then I'm happy to see so many representatives here today. Predictability and long-term perspective and a level playing field for industry with decades-long planning and investment horizons for billions of US dollars. So again, governance and long-term predictability is what I'm talking about. And that takes me to the last point, ladies and gentlemen. Governance and open discourse on the political level. An absolute precondition for the successful Norwegian history of petroleum production has been the broad political consensus in Parliament and between shifting governments and opposition. It has provided the operators with the necessary predictability on rules, regulations and tax regimes, and given governments and parliaments the basis for long-term budgeting. Ladies and gentlemen, the Norwegian Petroleum Fund, where all our oil and gas revenue ends up, has a market value today of $1,000 billion. I'm not so very good with numbers, but I think that is the same as $1 trillion US dollars. That could never have been achieved without good governance and broad political consensus. Ladies and gentlemen, to sum up, governance which are being discussed here today is key for any policy area, but then absolutely vital in the petroleum sector. It is necessary to secure the use of these immense resources for the benefit of all, today and tomorrow. I very much look forward to these 2 coming days to learn more about how this is being discussed in Ghana, on the continent, in other countries, and I wish once again ACEP all the best, and thank you very much for organizing this event. And ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention.
Another round of applause for His Excellency. I'm very pleased that he ended on a note about good governance and political consensus. As Africans, we know that those are some of the issues that bedevil us. And it's interesting that we have come to that time of the program where we hear from the minister. Unfortunately, the minister is not here, but we have Dr. Amin, who is the Deputy Minister of Energy, who is going to deliver a keynote address to us. And I'm hoping that the issue of political consensus would be one of the things that he talks about. But very briefly, before he comes up, Dr. Amin is no stranger to this summit. He is proudly ex-ACEP, and he is now the Deputy Minister. He was responsible for the petroleum sector. Before his appointment, he was the founder and executive director of the African Center for Energy Policy. He had previously worked as an energy policy analyst at the Ministry of Energy, Ghana, Commissioner for Ghana's Public Utilities Regulation Commission, PURC. He was former Deputy Minister of State for the Northern Region and former Mayor of Tamale. He was also the Africa Coordinator of Extractive Industries in IBIS. Globally, Mr. Adam has worked extensively on extractive industries and resource management. He currently serves on 2 international advisory boards, the Open Contracts and Partnership and the Natural Resource and Community Review. He is a member of several global initiatives, including the Thematic Network on Good Governance of Extractive and Land Resources and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, the Executive Session on the Political Economy of Extractive Industries, and the International Research Collaborative on Natural Resources Governance, Inequality, and Human Rights, Law and Society. Dr. Amin in Africa has worked on petroleum policy and resource governance projects in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, and Kenya, advising governments, supporting parliamentary committees, and civil service organizations. With a round of applause, can we welcome the Honourable Deputy Minister for Energy and Responsibility for the Petroleum Sector. Honourable.
Thank you so much. And let me start by also paying tribute to the chair for today, Muslim Kenya. She has done so well for herself and for Africa. But you said we were not kind to you, but I can tell you, ACEP is not kind to me and my minister. They forget that we founded ACEP, but it is as difficult for us as it was for you at the time. I bring you greetings from the Honourable Minister for Energy, Honourable John Peter Amewu. And I'd like to advise that if you have subordinates, treat them well, because we never know what will happen. I used to be his boss at ACEP. Today he's my boss at the ministry. And Madam Chair, Your Excellencies, the Ambassador of Norway and other ambassadors present, the former Minister of Sudan, Dr. Osman Abdulrahman Fado, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of Parliament present, the Executive Director of ACEP, Benjamin Boachi, government representatives from across Africa, oil and gas companies represented here, friends from civil society organizations across the region, representative of the International EITI Secretariat, friends from the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I have such lengthy protocols. As our Nigerian friends will say, let me stand on all protocols already observed. I deem this a great opportunity and an honor to deliver the keynote address of the 2019 Africa Oil Governance Summit on the theme Optimizing Oil and Gas Resources in Africa, the role of new discoveries in the continent's development agenda. First and foremost, I would like to commend the Africa Center for Energy Policy, ACEP, for its consistency in championing the cause of ensuring that the exploitation of Africa's resources translates into tangible, equitable, and sustainable development for the entire continent. To participants who have traveled from across the world to be part of this August event, I also want to add my voice to earlier welcome delivered to you. And I say in my language, Ibaraba. Madam Chair, the theme for this year's summit is extremely important as it encapsulates important conversations we must have on Africa's oil and gas industry, and particularly as it defines our ability and constraints in putting our oil and gas resources to effective use for the benefit of our people. For decades, Africa has been an important contributor to the global supply of oil and gas. Since the late 1950s, when the first discovery of oil in commercial quantities was made in Nigeria, the continent has seen great expansion in its oil and gas industry. Increased investments in exploration has led to several discoveries around the continent. Between 1998 and 2018, total proven oil reserves on the continent has grown by at least 62%.
and this continues to expand annually. Given the increasing reserves of the continent in recent times, the trend is likely to continue as exploration successes in the past decade on the continent resulted in significant oil and gas discoveries in Ghana, Kenya, Mozambique, Tanzania, Uganda, Senegal, and recently South Africa. Although these new discoveries present great opportunity for the development of African nations and the continent as a whole, we have to be reminded of the governance deficits which have denied the continent the effective integration of the oil and gas industry into our development. We have chased revenue with weak revenue management capacity. And in that process, the linkages between the oil industry and education, agriculture, infrastructure, and industrialization have not been optimized. In Ghana, ladies and gentlemen, we decided to follow the path that links resource revenue with development policy. We believe that equitable distribution of this revenue assures the greatest development impact any country can make. The government of our President Akufo-Addo, has therefore been investing our oil revenue in providing free senior high school education to our people, and especially to empower the next generation of Ghanaians. Since the introduction of the policy, enrollment in schools has increased from about 430,000 students to over 1 million students in senior high schools. In 2018, fresh students enrollment was more than the total student population in 2016. This, we believe, is an equitable way of sharing the benefits from our oil and gas resources. Ladies and gentlemen, as the theme for the summit suggests, we are unable to achieve the oil development nexus if we do not maximize opportunities offered by our new discoveries. Particularly, we are challenged by emerging competing resources and constraints, such as the abundant and increasingly cheaper renewable energy alternatives, electric vehicles, and tighter environmental standards. These have compelled countries to adopt aggressive strategies for exploration and development of their oil and gas potential. This year alone, my friends, 7 African countries conducted bidding rounds to allocate oil blocks to investors. Also, Ghana and many other countries are reviewing our legislation to incentivize greater investment upstream. Therefore, with these developments, we may be faced with stranded resources at some point in time, rather than the world's oil running out as predicted. To address the challenges in the oil and gas industry and maximize opportunities from discoveries, oil companies, and we have a lot of them here, have given attention to value creation in their operations. These companies have or are going through the process of significant cost reduction in response to lower crude oil prices just to maximize value and optimize opportunities. They have been trying to create value through improved supply chains, asset utilization, and capital effectiveness. They are developing company strategies that align work processes with procedures and enablers committed to improving company performance. But oil companies have complementary development roles as well. We know that your business is to find and produce oil, but we also know that as oil companies, you have innovative technology and business models that can make every venture a success, be it in agriculture, manufacturing, education, or music. You must therefore rise up to the challenge and not leave issues of development to governments and their people. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in Africa, our governments in Africa must also identify the size of the challenge with new discoveries and plan effectively to accommodate its effects on the energy industry in particular and national development in general. It appears our most significant challenge in the continent is the trillions of cubic feet of stranded gas discoveries that we are making, and our inability to use this gas for our development due to limited demand resulting from low industrialization. We in Ghana are paying for gas we are not using, and I believe this exists in other African countries. We are unable to offtake as much gas from neighboring Nigeria as envisaged under the West Africa Gas Pipeline project. Yet, our recent gas discoveries and those of Senegal and Mauritania and undeveloped gas resources in Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, create an uncertain environment for the commercialization of our sub-regional gas resources. How we maximize opportunities around these resources must be of greater concern to our governments and investors. Notwithstanding this obviously important challenge, ladies and gentlemen, natural gas remains the transition fuel for accelerating the transformation of our economies. We can industrialize Africa on the back of the opportunities presented by natural gas. And for example, we can revolutionize agriculture through increased fertilizer use. Because current fertilizer use rates in Africa are low. And I'll give you some of the statistics. Average fertilizer use in Africa is 10 kilograms per hectare, equivalent to 10% of the world average, and almost 20 times less than the average for Asia, and 9 times less than the average for Latin America. Petrochemical products like plastics, packaging, clothing, digital devices, medical equipment, detergents, tires, and many others are in high demand for industrial use in Africa and across the world. According to Barclays Research, as the base for all plastics, the demand for petrochemicals has increased over 50% in 10 years. And as the world economy and the global population continue to grow, petrochemicals will overtake transportation in the 2030s as the biggest contributor to oil consumption. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we need to seize the moment to put the industrialization of our countries on top of our development agenda. In Ghana, here, our government has approved the establishment of a petroleum hub in the western region of our country with a strong focus on petrochemicals. The hub, which will be a free zone area, will also provide infrastructure for the processing, refining, storage, and distribution of petroleum products across the country and into the sub-region. But we cannot do it as individual countries. Madam Chair, we have to blend domestic strategy with regional efforts. We have to evaluate how the regional context continues to evolve in the face of changing industry, technology, and intercontinental trade. We have to build regional projects and promote shared use of infrastructure. We must, for example, re-examine the West Africa Gas Pipeline framework within the context of current regional realities. By linking it to sub-regional gas sources, adopting bi-directional flow designs in developing the pipelines, and ensuring competitive pricing to promote a comprehensive sub-regional trade in gas. Ladies and gentlemen, I really look forward to recommendations on how to deal with regional challenges and maximize opportunities around our oil and gas resources, specifically in the following areas: the opportunities that exist in the oil and gas sector in the context of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and how anticipated challenges can be surmounted. Financing the development of Africa's refinery capacity beyond the current level of 2.5% of global refinery throughput. Development of shared infrastructure needed to facilitate regional collaboration and ensuring the security of our infrastructure. The opportunity to power the continent with our abundant, stranded natural gas resources. Creating an environment conducive for boosting investment. And most importantly, ensuring that the development of oil and gas facilitates development and provides opportunities for an all-inclusive and holistic development paradigm for our people. Madam Chair, meetings like this present opportunity for the continent to converge on strategies to rewrite the narrative. And I take cognizance of the need for political consensus in this enterprise. We are capable of correcting our mistakes. We must, as relevant stakeholders in the sector, and regardless of varying interests, ensure that the well-being of the African people is the ultimate motivation driving governments and companies to exploit oil and gas resources on our continent. Whilst we ensure that countries, first and foremost, obtain a fair share of the outcomes of the extractive resource, we must not forget that we can leverage these resources to provide alternative energy to our people and to feed our industries. Industrializing Africa on the back of oil resources does not only provide opportunity for Africa's people, but also expands opportunities for the global investment community. This is why we have to work together as stakeholders to promote Africa's development for Africa's people and for the world. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, kindly permit me to end my speech by expressing my appreciation to the Africa Center for Energy Policy, the conveners of this summit, and their partners for this august program to deliberate on such pertinent issues. It is my hope that the discussions will yield practical steps that will improve the lot of governments, businesses, and the people of Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, time runs very fast. When I stood here to launch the first Africa Oil Governance Summit, I knew it was a worthy platform. But 5 years on, Boachi and his team at ACEP have made it a truly living African platform. And I want to once again thank ACEP, especially Benjamin Boachi, for such great and inspirational leadership at ACEP. On this note, it is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to declare the 5th Africa Oil Governance Summit 2019 officially open. I wish us all very meaningful discussions. May God bless our country, Ghana. May God bless Africa. May God bless all of us. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister. And it's interesting to see the long catalogue of things that he's expecting from the summit. We hope that by the end of the summit, we won't disappoint the Minister and all the issues that he listed would have been dealt with. And thank you also for formally opening the summit. So we now turn to the panel sessions. Unfortunately, I understand the Minister will be leaving us very shortly, so he may not be able to participate in the panel session. So we do apologize for that. I think there are other places that he used to be this morning, so unfortunately he will not be with us. We start off with the panel sessions. There's one first panel session, after which we will have a very short snack break. This panel session will be chaired by our chairperson, in the form of Rosalind Kenya MBE. She's already been up, she's been introduced. But very quickly, just to let you know how the panel sessions will be run. This session, the topic for this first session is value addition to petroleum resources extraction through industrialization. the possibilities and the challenges. The objective of this session will be to explore strategies to optimally develop Africa's petroleum resources to meet the petroleum product demands of the growing African population. So this is how this panel is going to run. Madam Chairperson is going to come up and she will then call up her panel members. So she will actually go through the biographies and introduce her panel members. And then she will kickstart the discussion. I don't know exactly how she wants to run it, so when she comes up, she will let you know. And after which there will be a short question and answer, and then we will proceed very quickly into our first night break for today. Madam Chairperson, your panel. Thank you. I think I'll introduce my panel from here. So as I prematurely called them before, but now is the time. This first panel is going to look at value addition to petroleum resources extraction through industrialization, the possibilities and the challenges. And my panelists, Dr. As I call you, if you could come up please, Dr. Osman Abdel Rahman Fadou. He's Executive Director Ben Bakia and former Minister of Petroleum and Gas from Sudan. Let's give him a round of applause. Ms. Abna Anwar, who's on the board of Cosmos Energy. Abna, if you could come up. Professor Olomi Ilagere. He's a GMP professional chair in oil and gas economics and management. Is the prof here? Oh, that's good. And finally, but not least at all, Ms. Delila Idrisu, Business Development Manager for Reverse Oil and Gas Angola. Their bios are in your books, but I'll let each of them give a brief introduction of themselves as they so wish in the context of this before we start. I shall be Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam for the purposes of this. Is this on? Can you all hear me? Yes, we can. I see friends and family in the audience. Comforting. Thank you. Okay. So, we're looking at a very, very big topic here. We've got quite a bit of time to do so. But just to give a bit of background, BP projects that by 2035, Africa will account for 43% of the global increase in population. This population surge is expected to increase energy demand by 93% between 2014 and 2035, much faster than the global average of 41%. Thankfully, Africa has an oil and gas production indicator of 200% and 159% respectively. Thus, Africa does have the potential to meet all of its internal energy demand from oil and gas, despite a soaring population with excess exports. Unfortunately though, due to the lack of adequate infrastructure, Africa is resigned to the exploitation of large portions of its crude production and importation to meet its consumption needs of refined petroleum products. Thus, African countries are able to maximize the benefits of oil and gas endowments beyond the fiscal gains. So this panel and this morning we'll be exploring how Africa can leverage on its abundant oil resources to create linkages in various other sectors to fuel economic growth. We'll explore strategies to optimally use the resources to meet the demands of the growing population. The fundamental question is what is possible and what is not. Finally, it can be reasoned that increasing commercial oil and gas discoveries on the continent will probably increase the chance of economic linkages and industrialization. Africa must position itself well to attract the right kinds of infrastructural investments along and beyond the oil and gas value chain. we'll also be looking, and we've heard talk about the green shift and the environmental implications of this industry. We'll also have a discussion about what that means for Africa and how we need to position ourselves. But to start off with, I'll ask each of you to just give a brief introduction of who you are, who you work for, and your experience in the oil and gas industry. Starting with you, Lana.
So, Dalila Idrisu, I'm Ghanaian, and I work in Angola for an oil and gas services company called Freebush Oil and Gas. We provide services to the oil and gas industry, and I'd like to say that we are what we would call a local company that has been able to empower ourselves to effectively provide services at international standards to the oil and gas industry.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Omawumi Ilejari.
He believed that if you had a road, it would make it easier for people to go get in and out of work faster and, I guess, work harder. But fortunately, we have more than $1, so we possibly can build a road and invest in or share the dollar and invest in oil and gas services. I think what we're hearing here is that definitely we can use this sector to drive broader industrialization. And that's why I actually was not very keen on the petroleum products bit, because it meant that we were sort of bringing the money back into the sector. And I think the question is about thinking a lot more broadly. So we don't have a lot of time, and I want to go on to talk about the impact of, as we are going for this industrialization, the environmental and climate change agenda. I think, Dr. Raman, again, if you could just give us a sense of what we do as we're driving this industrialization that you're talking about. What do we need to do to mitigate this impact? And this is not just on the oil and gas sector. We go into manufacturing, or infrastructure building, where we're emitting, and adding to what I understand to be global warming. So what would you suggest that we do to drive the industrialization we need and manage the impacts?
Environmental.
Yes, environmental. Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay. When we talk about various industries, let's say the industries related to the petroleum industry itself, there will be various emissions, etc., that are detrimental to the environment. But the world is changing and technology is also changing. Example, in a refinery, when you have a flare, that is burning gases which may be poisonous and so on. Now, utilizing the proper technology and consultancy agencies, you can improve the design by removing all those hazards from the flared gases, capturing what is going to be harmful. There are various ways of adding steam, removing those by exchanges and so on. But when you talk about the current situation, Africa is not the, let us say, they are the least in being detrimental to the environment. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about new projects. When you make a new project, make sure that you are going to reduce those factors to the minimum. So that if you do it wrongly and you make a mess, then it's going to cost you more in order to make it right. And this is the principle of quality management as well. So you don't have to miss that.
When I spoke to you, you as a person, even as a reformed, I'm giving to when I spoke to you, even as a reformed investment banker, you were talking about investments, looking at the future, particularly thinking about this climate change agenda that we have. So what sort of advice would you, I mean, for me, I think, does Africa, are we capable of managing and mitigating the impact of our industrialization, bearing in mind the global agenda?
Thank you very much. So I think countries have signed on to the Paris Climate Change Accord, and we've all committed to reducing, going below by less than 2 degrees, dropping temperatures. But for me, the big trends we're seeing in the financing of companies, for instance, the Energy stocks are now 5% of the S&P 500 index, down from 13% about 10 years ago. It's telling you that where the companies that were dominant before, it's changing. A few months ago, there was a big hue and cry because a huge fund manager in the UK, Legal & General insurance company, over 1.3 trillion assets under management, decided to divest out of ExxonMobil and other oil and gas companies because they weren't addressing the climate change issues for them as fast as they are. And we're seeing a lot of these going on. New Zealand, France, even though it may be a bit more symbolic, whole countries are stating that there will be no new exploration or renewal of oil and gas contracts from 2030 to 2040. So we're seeing that in the boardrooms of energy companies, the discussion about what we're doing and how we're doing it is impacting the environment. And the other thing they're doing is addressing quickly what they will do about it. So this is at the top of the agenda. It's critical that this is then informing where we are going to invest in the oil and gas sector. It's true that technologies are improving, how we're doing things are improving, mitigating the risks from spillage and all of that is improving, but what type of oil and gas we are even going to go and invest in is critical. So exploration, I think it's going to change very significantly. And we're seeing also what we call short cycle exploration. No one has time to spend 5 years negotiating with the government to sign an oil and gas contract when it's going to take them another 7 years to go into development and then start taking out the products, and that is 12 years gone in an industry whose outlook in the next 10 to 12 years is a bit of a big question mark, because when you look at the BP energy outlook, what they estimate in terms of the fastest growing sector additions to the energy mix will not come from the oil and gas sector, but from the renewables sector. So this comes to African governments, for instance, the Ghanaian government, and the latest bid round in Ghana is testament that we were not able to attract the normal international oil companies. The outturn for us wasn't as great. So that the way in which they go and negotiate these contracts, what they need to do to attract investment into this sector is completely different from what we did more than 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I think these are some of the things they need to look at from a policy perspective.
Prof. Wumi, you said I called you Wumi when we... So, for you, one of the things, I mean, you mentioned before the thing about time running out, and I think part of it relates to what I've not just spoken about. What do you mean by time is running out, and what would you advise to governments, the African government represented here, and also to the companies who are exploring, particularly, can I say, indigenous companies who are looking very focused on this local content, local participation policy? What is your advice to them in terms of this industrialization agenda? And we don't have a lot of time, and I want the lovely lady from Angola to also, she's traveled all the way here, so she has to say more than just a few sentences. You live here, so you can talk forever. So, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But I think it's important for me to make a disclaimer. That is, everything I say is my opinion. rather than my employers or my association. Okay. Because I think it's important so that it's not going to be as if I'm speaking on behalf of my institution, because I'm going to have some disagreement. Yes, because I listened, and again, my brain was cracking. I listened that the oil and gas. I listened to my partner, and I'm going to answer your question. And we're talking in terms of about growth, and we're looking at the renewable contributing. And the growth of renewable is going to, what is the base of renewable that we are talking about, the growth? So we need to look at this number carefully. And the fact that we do not get quick response of people coming here does not mean they are not interested in oil. Is it because we don't have a fiscal system that's attractive and we have not been able to fully estimate the resource base? And that's why I needed to make a disclaimer. So it's not going to be, I'm a believer in what we call energy supply mix. Comparative advantage. Renewable, oil, and gas. For the next 60 years, it is still estimated that fossil fuel will add value. But I don't want African countries to be carried away with European Union, American, or anybody. Let's look at Africa. What are the resources that we can develop to optimize our development? Again, France is running out of depletable resources. So they have to think far into the future and see that renewable may be what they need to look into. The same thing with the US. They discover that they want to have petroleum independence, and all of a sudden they have shale gas, they have shale oil, and they are producing it. If Africa has oil, what we are going to be thinking is, how can we talk the talk and walk the talk effectively without damaging ourselves? Because if we don't use this oil that we have and the gas to stimulate our development and put attention into using proper technology to mitigate environment, it is possible. Technology comes with skill development. Skill development is in our university environment. That's why there will be mix between business, government, and the academia to be able to fashion the way to use whatever resources that we have to be able to grow the economy in Africa. We were ahead of Asia before. We are behind. So I'm not going to say that we should not pay attention to environment, that we should not allow environmental dictates to strangulate the young professionals that are emerging without jobs. This is where using petroleum for industrial expansion becomes so important for Africa. Do not stop talking the talk about the importance of environment, but do not let the walk into the environmental strategies of Europe, America, and Asia to stimulate the development of our young people. We have the youngest population. We must use petroleum to build the infrastructure that is required. If you have 1 million, the only problem is the government does not need to invest in petroleum resource development. The government needs to create a business environment that will attract investors. There's no better place to look for oil and gas, quote me, than the Gulf of Guinea. We don't have the money in Africa, we just need to develop a regulatory framework, cut the negotiation time, so that you don't have too much of waiting to get approval. Stop spending too much of your money on regulatory agencies. Let us avoid regulatory capture. I believe in oil as a base to build this economy, including making access to energy productive. I'm sorry I didn't answer your question. But I'd like to say this. I'm not an anti-environmentalist. No. I believe in energy supply mix and comparative advantage for you moving forward.
Thank you so much, Prof. You did answer not just my question, but the questions of many people in this room. So thank you very, very much indeed. I'm so glad I let you finish. The leader. Okay. Just you finally before we open up. Sorry, Ben. I just need an extra 5 minutes for questions and then because he was very passionate. You have to let him. I couldn't stop. I couldn't use my usual to stop it. You're an Angolan-based company, but when I spoke to you on school, you were talking about wanting to reach out into other countries. And I think the Deputy Minister rightly said that we shouldn't just be focused on countries, but we should also focus on regionalization. So just in terms of this industrialization drive and all that we've spoken about here, when I spoke to you, you said you had certain challenges going into other African countries, and I think it's very important that you share those, or maybe share some of the solutions you had to meeting those challenges, because I don't believe we can have a fully effective industrialization drive in the broad sense without our cross-country sort of collaboration and allowing, for me, the success of a local company is one that can then go successfully and bid next door without having any political ties and just get the job done. So just share your experiences and then we'll open up for questions.
Thank you for that, Madam Chair. Okay, so looking at the challenges of an indigenous company, we are always faced with, inherent barriers to entry in terms of, them saying, oh, if you look at even the bidding process, the requirements for a bidding process, you need a certain amount of experience. It needs to be in a particular sector. You need to have these lists of certificates and whatnot. So how we've been able to overcome these barriers is we were fortunate because at the time when oil prices crashed in Angola, and a lot of the international companies were now, reducing the kind of exposure they had to the country because of the restriction in terms of forex restriction. We said, listen, here we are, we're Angolan, we're willing to take the Kwanzas, we don't have some investors sitting abroad that we need to now find dollars for to go and pay them. So we were willing to take on that risk, and we looked at localizing our costs as much as possible. And that is how we were able to give ourselves competitive advantage. So even though maybe on paper they had all these lists of prerequisites, we challenged our clients and said, listen, okay, you have these lists of challenges, right? List of requirements rather, and you want to achieve a certain level of service. We will guarantee you this level of service at a competitive price. Just, literally just give us the open door to be able to achieve that. Now, how are we trying to now move into other countries? So we've registered in Ghana, Nigeria, Mozambique, Namibia, and we've done this because we've always, we're taking a long-term approach to our business, and we've decided that, we understand the African approach. And by understanding the African approach, there are similarities in other countries. So for example, Mozambique, language is similar, and the same companies that are operating in Angola, we are able to, they're also operating there. So, which is the norm, right? So Italian companies move with ENI, for example. The Norwegian companies move with ACEP. So we said, okay, why not? We're already pre-qualified with all of these IOCs. Why not move to where they are? It just makes sense that way. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I think I'll just have 5 minutes if I may. We started late, so 5 minutes for questions from the audience. I'm looking at Ben because I can't see. Is that okay, please? Please, ma'am. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am, for the vital question you asked on the oil being able to industrialize Africa. I want to ask the panelists, because in the course of discussion, I want to ask, is it possible to really industrialize Africa with the hostilities? Because when the professor was making a summation, he said, if you put Africa together, or West Africa is like the size of America. But the country that has so much partitioned itself, that you have the xenophobic attacks, the trade that's supposed to be free is so restricted and all that, then how do you globalize locally within the continent to be able to industrialize?
Which country are you talking about?
I'm picking the whole, because if you want to industrialize the whole continent, because that's the advantage, that's why you find Chinese running to Africa and taking advantage of the population. If Africa itself cannot take advantage of their own continent with their population, where's the place of industrialization there?
Thank you. Okay, we'll deal with these two questions. I'm going to answer the first, and I think Professor Umi, you seem to be very keen to answer the second. And Dr. Raman also wants to answer the second also? Okay, and do you also want to answer the second? No. Okay, good. Okay, please,
thank you very much. We had the Honorable Deputy Minister say that we're currently spending our oil revenues on free SHS, getting more children into our free SHS program, and that is the policy direction of this particular government, which is great, but I still think there's a lot in the quality of education that needs to be invested in. For me, I want to look at the way we want to industrialize more at the sectors that are contributing the most to our GDP. Ghana currently is the services sector. And in the services sector, currently contributes more than 50% to our total GDP. So what sort of investments are we making in this sector to drive further industrialization? The second place I want to look at where we need to invest is in the sectors that employ the most people. We in Africa have a very youthful population. In the next 10 to 15 years, our workforce will be over 600 million people. 40% of these people will be the youth. We need to think about what sector is engaging them. When the majority of population is engaged in the agro sector, what are we doing to ensure that people have more opportunities, are more entrepreneurial in the sector? So for me, African governments need to look at investment in the services sector and in sectors that engage the most numbers of our people. In Nigeria, the second largest employer of agriculture is the creators economy, what we call Nollywood. Nollywood today is the second largest employer, direct and indirect, in Nigeria. What are we doing? What investments are governments making in these sectors? The fact that the oil and gas sector can get revenue to provide the infrastructure, the roads, the power, the energy, the social services that we need is without a question. But we must address the sectors that contribute the largest to our GDPs, and it's not the oil and gas sector, and the largest to our millions and millions of people.
Thank you very much. So it seems in answer to your question, you don't feel that enough money of the oil and gas revenues is being directed into what is really necessary and important. Okay. Dr. Rahman and then Dr. Rum. I don't think we'll be able to take any more questions at this stage. Maybe you can put your question in the next panel. Just pretend that it's us and let's answer it. So, Dr. Rahman.
Yeah. I think maybe I understood the question in two parts. The first question.
I thought you were going to answer the second question.
No, the second.
The second question about can we, with the sort of hostilities and.
Yes, I'll answer the second, but I think the first question I misunderstood.
Okay.
I think it's important to make. Okay. I think I heard about the stability fund.
Yes.
And the stability fund is part of the government trying to safeguard itself against fluctuation of oil prices. it doesn't take into consideration that the revenue that is generated is totally spent on either the budget or the expenditure on projects or other things like that. So these are two different things. The second thing is that, in a country like Ghana, you want to build a refinery. If you want to build a refinery, you don't think of yourself alone. The refinery will generate, let us say, added value, because you are going to use a crude oil, whether it is for local consumption or for export. Now, if it's for local consumption, you have to think of your neighbors. Thinking of your neighbors, that is an added, let us say, of creating a cooperation between your neighbors. I would like to extend that not only to the region, I would like to extend it to Africa in every aspect. That has to be a strategy where the African countries, by drawing their own in their own country, taking into the consideration their neighbors, then they explore that in the whole of Africa, then you can, let us say, get the industrialization of the whole of the continent, taking that into consideration. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much. Yes, I agree with you. It's a complex issue and it's a political issue. And to me, that is the essence of ECOWAS. And that's the essence of the African Union, to be able to expand the economy. And then you can see that you don't have a good framework. What's happening in the EU today can easily happen. And I know that you are alluding to the fact that Nigerian government closed their border to you. Honestly, it's a very complex issue. I won't say that I know the solution. But I wish we can avoid a populist government. A populist government does not develop a nation. You can cast your mind back to the 60s, when it is not about populism, it is about infrastructure. And you can still see, and forgive me if I say this, you can see Nkrumah in Ghana, and that was 1950s and 60s, because the infrastructures are there. Listen, if you open the road from here to Lagos, 6-lane, free trade, free movement. It happened. I was in Holland. I easily could go to Belgium when I was living in Holland with cars, and I just saw a valid document. We need to move away from populist government for now. Africa has enough resources to develop itself. It has enough population. What is lacking, in my opinion, is governance that is meant for the future. Prosperity today, without prosperity in view, is meaningless. If you are prosperous and you are not thinking about tomorrow, it's inconsequential. So we need to take away some of these barriers we are creating for ourselves. Africa has the highest young population. And I was asking myself as I did with home, why should I find it a lot easier to carry a blue passport than carry a Ghanaian passport? Canada is taking the best of our best to grow the economy. We are rejecting the best of the best from the surrounding countries because of populism. It's not going to take us anywhere.
Well, thank you very much. We have taken advantage of the late start to run over our time a bit, but I do want to thank my panelists very much. I think, I was looking at the job we're given to do, and I think we succeeded. We put forward the challenges that there are to value addition, to our natural resources for industrialization, and we gave some solutions. So I hope the communique will reflect this sufficiently. And I want to thank you, the audience, for being so patient with us listening and clapping at the right points. Thank you very much. Agreed on the importance of oil and gas or energy for industrialization in Africa. There is an understanding and acceptance that oil and gas can be seen as a foundation on which industrialization can be developed. We need to see oil and gas as a sector for more than just revenue gathering, but we need to look at using oil and gas to create a multiplier effect. The quickest way to drive generation out of poverty in Africa by using the oil and gas sector to provide jobs for us. So that is something that I believe the communique should capture. It's also important to look at the energy supply mix. We shouldn't just look at the positions of the EU and America, who perhaps have gone beyond oil and gas industrialization. We need to, as Africa, look at the resources that we have, how we can develop those resources, and how we can optimize those resources for development. So it is not just a case of listening to environmental dictates. It's also very important that we need to also look at, as African countries, there needs to be the focus on creating the right regulatory framework, the right regulatory environment, and ensuring that our institutions avoid regulatory capture. Finally, there was a perspective from an indigenous African company and the challenges that they had encountered in ensuring that they could participate in the oil and gas sector. And their position was that as indigenous companies, they needed to look at the various challenging requirements and think of the level of service that they could offer. So for purposes of the communique, this is just a very quick summary of the discussions, and I believe the key points that took place. I have a few announcements to make just before we proceed to our first snack break. I'm sure you've seen the announcement on my right-hand side that we're actually trending on Twitter. So the Twitter handle is up. There's a hashtag up. So please feel free to go in there. And then also the event is on Facebook. It's on Facebook at the moment. It's on Facebook Live. So I have been asked by ACEP to let you know that that is happening. Please go onto the ACEP page, like the event, and then ensure that this discussion is not just limited to we, the participants in this room, but the wider world hears about what we are doing today and the importance of what we're doing. Thank you so much. We are now going to go for our first snack break. Because our time is fast spent, the snack break is I think it's 20 minutes, so we are due back. It's 11:38, let's say 11:40. So I think we should be here latest by lunchtime, 12 o'clock, when we can start our second panel discussion. That's panel 2, which will be looking at powering Africa, questions of energy independence and innovation. So exactly at 12 o'clock, the next panel will start. Tea and coffee, cocoa, snacks is served outside. Enjoy yourself and see you back at 12 o'clock. Thank you. The topic for our next session is on powering Africa, questions of energy independence and innovation. The objective of this panel is to discuss the potentials and practicality of an oil and gas-powered Africa from a sustainability, innovation, and independence perspective. To facilitate this panel is Ms. Pauline Anneman, who is a senior policy analyst and the head of the policy unit at ACEP. Just a brief bio of Pauline. Pauline focuses on evidence-based research, policy analysis, and advocacy to inform decisions in the oil and gas, power, and mining sectors in Ghana and Africa. Her experiences span legal and regulatory reviews, contract transparency, fiscal, corporate governance, etc., along the extractive value chain. Prior to joining ACEP, Pauline worked in research, policy and business development at TrustWorks
Global Limited in the Netherlands, and Tallow Oil PLC UK. Pauline's background is in law from GIMPA in Ghana, with specialization in natural resources law and international trade and investment law. Public policy, she has a master's in that, from the Blavatsky School of Government, University of Oxford, with specialization in economic development, political foundations and economic strategies, and also land economy from KNUST in Ghana. She's an alumna of the International Visitor Leadership Program by the U.S. Department of State. Pauline is passionate about optimization of Africa's energy resources for economic transformation and human development. If I can call up Pauline to the podium, there she comes. Can we give a round of applause to Pauline? So as to the protocol for the last session, Pauline will introduce her panel members. There will be a discussion. I think you have 45 minutes for both the discussion and the presentations, and then I will come and take over once they're done. Thank you so much, Pauline.
Thank you so much, Dr. Juliet. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the second panel session. I would call upon the panelists for this session, and as they take their seats, when they take their seats, I would allow them to introduce themselves as happened in the first panel so that we can move faster. So the first person on this panel is Ms. Jennifer Boka. Please give it up for her. She's the country manager for Lekela Power, which is a renewable energy company. We also have Mr. Roberto Daniel. Mr. Roberto Daniel is the managing director of ENI EMP Ghana Limited. Please give it up for him, please. We have also Mr. Justice Taimensa, who is an economist at the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group, Washington, D.C. Please give it up to him. Hello, please can everybody hear me? Okay, we'll proceed with this session. And before we begin, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves to everyone. So we'll start with Ms. Jennifer Boka.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Bocha. I'm the head of responsible investment for a renewable company called Lekela Power. Lekela invests in renewable power in Africa, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a minute. And very, very excited to be part of this discussion today.
Thank you. So we move on to Roberto.
I thought I had 25 minutes to present myself. Hi, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Roberto Daniele. I'm the managing director of in Ghana.
Hi. Okay. My name is Justice Temensa, and I am an economist at the International Finance Corporation of the World Bank Group.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. So we'll move straight into the issues. And what we are going to discuss is about powering Africa's economy through the oil and gas industry with our oil and gas resources. What are the possibilities? What are the challenges? And for us, we are going to discuss energy independence and issues about innovation in renewables that have impact on oil and gas industry. And as a matter of context, we know that in the world there are about 1.1 billion people without access to power. This is by the UNDP. And out of this population, 70% come from Africa. But we also have an agenda in Africa to achieve access, 100% electricity access by 2030 under the SDGs. Now, very few countries have achieved more than 50% of electricity access in Africa. An example is Ghana, we have South Africa, we have also Kenya, we have Senegal. There are a lot of other countries which have electricity access below 50%. And another interesting thing to note is that these countries that have access more than 50% are countries that have majority of their energy sources or electricity sources coming from thermal. For example, Ghana's thermal sources of electricity is about 53%. South Africa is over 90%. And these other countries with low access to power have limited thermal power capacity. Most of them rely on renewables. So this brings us to the question of the role of renewables in power generation. Is it realistic for Africa? And what is the role of the oil and gas industry in power generation in Africa? So to begin, I would ask my panelists to each give us their perspective about the topic that we are about to discuss. Let's start with Madam Jennifer Botta, right? Yes, please, can you tell us, in your opinion or in your professional opinion, is renewable energy something that Africa can pursue?
Thank you so much, Pauline. I wanted to kind of take a step back a little bit from Africa, and I appreciate Professor there said we should not be driven by what's going on in other places. But I wanted to place the discussion we're having today in a little bit more of a broader context and look at globally really what is going on. The change is happening actually much more faster than we think. Many people don't actually realize that globally things have shifted so much and very quickly. And that's really the story I want to talk about today, is the pace of change and the timing. And actually, we're still having these discussions today, but change is happening very rapidly. Let's take the case of coal, for example. Global investment in coal has plummeted by 80% in the last decade alone. For the first time ever, more coal stations around the world are being shut down than are being opened. Analysis by the Carbon Tracker, this is a respected UK think tank, shows that 42% of the world's coal-generating fleets are loss-making, predicted to rise to 72% by 2040. They also say that it's cheaper to replace a third of the world's operating local coal fleets with renewable energy, with that figure rising to 96% in a decade. They estimate that 267 billion of investment in coal assets could be stranded by 2035. Let's look at the other side of that coin. In 2008, global capital investments in renewables was $305 billion. If you combine capital investment for oil, gas, coal, and nuclear for the same period, this was $105 billion. And that is half the investment that went into renewables in 2008. In 2008, 7% of new capital invested in power generation globally was renewable energy. Today, 10 years later, it is 66%. A few more statistics just to place this in the wider context. In 2007, the IEA, the International Energy Agency, forecast that there would be 180 gigawatts of renewable energy globally by 2024. 10 years later, in 2014, there were 900 gigawatts. I mean, they predicted 180. There were 900 gigawatts of wind and solar installed globally. So what is driving this change? Is it just environmental considerations? In fact, the answer is no, it's actually the economics, and we'll probably come into these discussions a bit later when we talk about the place of oil and gas in the energy mix. So the environmental credentials are important, but I think the answer is that increasingly, renewables are becoming extremely cost competitive to deliver, and so yes, they do have a place in our energy mix going into the future. Thank you.
Yes. Does it work? Yes. Yeah, I would say for sure the renewable energies is the present and the future, and as you said, things are moving very, very fast. Unfortunately, in my view, they're not moving so fast. I mean, energy sector, it's to me slow. As we said, somebody this morning said that internet world is moving really fast. The speed of the technology in the IT, for instance, compared to the speed of the technology in the energy industry, it's unfortunately much faster. So my question is, where is Mr. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Newton, let me say Leonardo? We need really a step change which is dramatic. Of course, very positively, things are changing and are changing very fast, but not as fast as they should be. Therefore, still the
Oh yes, I believe that we need to move direction as ENI. We have a lot of projects in renewable. We are focusing in having much more clean energy, environmental. It's very good that the society, everybody has realized the importance of environmental impact. And sure, many scientists disputing whether 2 degrees, 1 degree, 1.5, but the fact is that living in a cleaner environment is good for everybody. And this is something which we will never come back to, and it's perfect, excellent. So I'm sure that the future and the present will be much more interesting in the energy world, to move faster and to find solutions which will be beneficial for everybody.
Okay, so I'm going to address the issue from a slightly different angle. So I want you to join me. Let's take a step back 10 years ago or 12 years ago, 2007. Ghana discovered oil. I was in this country at the time. Everybody was haywire. Everybody thought that the heaven or the manna that we were expecting from heaven has finally landed. Not only Ghana, many other African countries, and in part of the research that I do at the bank, it's also trying to understand some of these things. Once countries, particularly low-income countries, discover oil, there's a lot of excitement among people, including government, because they can score political points. Everybody thinks that the fortunes are going to change, so expectations are high. But unfortunately, the oil sector really does not create much jobs. It really does not, it's not well integrated into other sectors of the economy. Now, how do politicians solve this conundrum? Everybody's expecting that the right thing will be done. And in the first session, we talked about industrialization. In my view, this is where we can use oil and gas resources to make sure that other sectors of the economy benefit. Now, many countries in Africa are discovering gas. Ghana, for instance. The way forward is what policymakers should be thinking about, in my view, personal view, of course, is how can we use this gas to power industrialization, to make sure that we use it to develop the power sector. The talk about renewables for me, so as a development economist and also someone who focuses a lot more on energy, if you ask me for my view, that it is not a question of whether renewables or not. From a development perspective, I think that what Africa needs is not light. What Africa needs is power. Having lighting solutions will not solve our development problem. What we need is power that will be able to support industries. Of course, we live in an environment, in an economy whereby, or in a global state where we need to think about the environment. It is very important. So countries should move away from more polluting energy sources. But I think that we shouldn't confuse, development policy makers about the target of what type of, whether renewable or non-renewable. The key question is, the power that, or the electricity that we are producing, is it one that is able to support industries to develop? Because it is out of that the people who are happy that we have discovered oil and gas are going to benefit. Because without power to support industries, there's no way African economy should be able to develop. So my take is that this session is really important, and it's important for us to really think about utilizing the energy resources that we have to be able to produce sufficient electricity that will power all aspects of the economy.
Thank you very much. So I like what Justice said about needing power to support industrialization. We don't just want light on in people's homes, but we want to ensure productive use of power. And we want to ensure that our oil and gas resources, our renewable energy supports that. So my next question is the renewable capable of supporting base load? How do we balance that with the oil and gas resource? We know that in Africa, our government we have a lot of oil. Yes, we continue to discover oil, and we want to make good use of our oil. And we know that there's also the need to transition to renewables. So there's the argument that, well, gas is a transitioning fuel. It can help, it's less, harmful to the environment than the oil itself. So how do our governments balance using the gas to industrialize as against, bringing in more renewables?
Okay, for the gas, if talking about Ghana, as most of you know already, gas is a new resource. We are actually, ENI is the only company producing non-associated gas in the country, and this has started just 2018. So it's something new, and it's something which really changed the possibility of the growth in the country. The reason why is that, first of all, it's a stable source of power, and this is necessary for the industry, otherwise it would create a lot of problems. So this is the first point. Second point is much cheaper than oil. Just to give you a couple of numbers, before and after we developed our field, the cost of power was reduced by 40%, emission by 30%. So for sure, as we said, gas is a transition source of energy, and it's fundamental, it's stable, it's cleaner, not clean, but cleaner. So for sure, gas remain and will remain for many years ahead the main source for energy. In fact, generally speaking, I mean, in Africa, unfortunately, only 13 or 14% of the energy is produced by gas. So this has a lot of margin of improvement for sure.
Yeah, probably want to echo the same. I think we see gas as mainly playing a role of transitional, as we transition towards wider adoption of renewables. But I think the key question for African governments is, do we plan for that, or do we actually treat gas as more of a destination, as opposed to a bridge fuel? And I think that's really the crux of the matter, if we want to transition to a much cleaner future, that is.
So, again, my point here will be that, so the fact that we have gas in Ghana or in Nigeria or in Mozambique does not necessarily mean that our power sector is going to transform instantaneously. Because extracting that gas into the generation companies requires huge investment. That means that our governments need to get it right in terms of the agreements that we sign. Again, agreements at the upstream, also agreements at the generation. So we go out, so often than not, the governments are usually excited about, we have a lot of all these resources, we are going to generate X amount of power. But the questions you ask ourselves is, are we signing the right agreements? The power purchase agreements that we are signing with the generation companies, are they the right type of agreements that will ensure that it translates into affordable power? I'm not saying that power should be free because you have gas. No, because that won't happen. But it is important for our policymakers to make sure that we sign the right agreements, we find the right type of people and companies with the expertise and the necessary technology to be able to do that. Because if that is not done, though gas is one of the cheapest ways of generating power, if the right agreements are not signed, the end user tariffs that consumers are paying will not be one that is so cheap, right? And it will still be incorporating a lot of the inefficiencies. Another part is, you might have very good generation, but if the downstream power sector, if the distribution aspect of the electricity network, if it's not efficient, there's no way you are going to have reliable power. So my point is that it is important for our policymakers to take a holistic view rather than just piecemeal approaches, thinking that we have gas, so it means that we are going to have all the power that we need. It won't happen until the right things are done.
Thank you very much. Now, I would like Roberto to speak to your experiences in producing gas in Ghana. In your opinion, do you think that the government of Ghana, for instance, was ready for the gas? We are talking about powering Africa's economy through the oil and gas resource. And you are extracting gas in Ghana. And there has been an agreement for government of Ghana to take the gas. What have been your experiences so far with the government of Ghana? Are we ready? Is there market for the gas in Ghana? So that we put this discussion in context. We have to commercialize the gas, right? If we find market for the gas, then it makes sense to extract it. So tell us about your experiences as a company in Ghana extracting gas.
Yes, that actually is a very good question. Of course, we are not here to produce gas from nothing. That's the point. And as the gentleman will say, so we need to find the way to improve development, which means consumption, which means need of energy. So the development is the key point. So of course we need to move into industrialization. Now in Ghana is quite an anomalous place in Africa because the government in the past years did a lot actually. I mean, I believe probably Ghana is one of the few countries where the capability of producing power is higher than the actual consumption. We are now more or less 60% of the capacity of the country, which of course is a good base for the development, which has to come. Our experience, as I said, I believe that the gas production is facilitating the process because energy should be a lower price. So this should help investment in the industrialization of the country. In terms of if the country was ready or not, yes, I would say it was ready. They did everything to move into this direction. In terms of the contract, I would like to give a little clarification. There is a perception sometimes in the public opinion, because you raised a good point, are the contract done in the correct way? Now, just to assure everybody, contracts are quite standard. I wouldn't say that the contract we have is different from the one you may have from another country, whether it's an African country or a European country. They are quite standard. It's not, of course, the interest of anybody to have a short view and a short profit. This is a business which lasts 20, 30, 40 years. And you know, like what we say in ENI is that we should have what we call a dual flag approach. That is putting the flag of ENI and the flag of the government together. We cannot move along. Just to give you an example, for instance, in other countries, like in Nigeria, for instance, we have developed gas field and we have built power plant. Because you need to generate profit for everybody. You need to give chance to a country to develop. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Yes, probably we could have more money if we export the gas, maybe with an energy plant, but it doesn't make sense. The place where you work is the place that has to grow together, all together. So I would say again, Ghana did a good job, for sure. Now is the time to increase industrialization and the development. There is the resource. You know, normally you can do, but you don't have enough energy. Ghana has it. So it's a good time to improve.
Okay, Justice, I'll need you to speak to industrialization in Africa, whether Africa is actually ready to take the gas that is about to be produced or that are currently being produced. We know that a lot of countries, some countries have signed on to agreements that require them to make consistent payments, but gas is not being utilized. An example is Ghana. Countries are going into debt. Is this sustainable?
So, well, it's good news that we have the Africa Free Trade, coming up. And for some time now, Ghana used to import gas from Nigeria. Now we discovered our own, I'm not sure, the agreement along the West African gas pipeline. But if you think of it from the broader sense, now Mozambique holds the largest deposit of gas in Africa, and they have started developing it. Tanzania also discovered gas. Our brothers on the west coast, Senegal and Mauritania, also discovered huge deposits of gas. Now, if you think along it, we have gas being discovered at strategic positions across the continent. And the Africa Free Trade now presents us a good opportunity for us to really think beyond the box to say, how do we put our resources together to make sure that there's a lot of trade among our countries to be able to utilize these resources that we have to be able to power the electricity sector and also benefit industrialization. But that will not come cheap. That will mean a lot of countries will need to make compromises. Now, it will mean that our governance needs to be set right. It will mean that we have to find ways of, like in the first section, our professor mentioned populism, to avoid issues of populism where everybody thinks, okay, wants to do some showman power. It will mean that we will need to develop the gas infrastructure, because countries along the coast can't be able to import gas, through vessels. But what about our landlocked countries? It will mean that we need to develop oil and gas pipelines to be able to transport these gas. But our experience from Nigeria, the time Ghana was importing gas from Nigeria, there were a lot of times that there were a lot of shortages. And part of it was because we were unable to pay our debt. And it goes back to what I'm saying, that countries need to also make sure that the power sectors in the countries are run efficiently, because if you are buying gas to produce and if people are not paying enough to be able to pay back for the gas, there will be a debt, right? And nobody will be able to supply you if you are unable to, more or less pay the gas that they are supplying to you. So to summarize, all I'm saying is that it is nice to have all these ideas, but it is important for us to get the fundamentals right. And that will start with governments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we are also talking about sustainable oil and gas production in Africa. We know that renewables is going to contribute about 50% to Africa's power generation by 2050. We also know that gas is also going to supply about 40% of that same power. Now, we have to ensure that there's a fine balance. We have seen Forbes has made a publication that provides that, renewables and gas have competitive pricing. So the question for me, to Jennifer, is how do you see, what are the opportunities for renewables in Africa? And do you think that Africa's gas is going to be stranded? Then I'll move on to Roberto to ask Roberto, as a company extracting oil and gas, you expect to expand your scope. You expect to go to different countries. Now, with this renewable being competitive in terms of pricing, and it is also said, there's evidence, there's literature to show that a lot of gas projects will be abandoned. Looking at this context, do you think there's opportunity for more investment in Africa's oil and gas industry? Is Africa's oil and gas going to go stranded? Are we going to have stranded assets?
I think that's a really critical question in today's context, because, as I said, renewables are becoming increasingly competitive in terms of the cost of generation. There's all sorts of figures flying around, but I have some figures here from LASA that show that, for example, it costs between $29 and $56 to produce wind, $29 and $56, unit by unit basis comparison. For solar PV, it's around $36 to $44. And when you look at gas peaking plants, and you probably can speak to this better than I can, it's $152 to $206. And for combined cycle plants, 41 to 74. For nuclear, 112 to 189, and for coal, it's $60 to $143. So clearly, the cost is going down. I look at a case of South Africa, for example, where Lekela, we've been involved in the renewable energy program there. When we initially bid, I think the cost was close to 30 cents for wind, and now we're talking about below 10 cents, for example. So it is dropping, and it's dropping dramatically, and the cost, this is driven by, obviously, we're now able to produce equipment in scale. In China, for example, they installed about 43 gigawatts of solar in 2018, meaning that you can produce loads and loads of solar panels, which then brings the cost down if you're having to manufacture quite so many. The other thing that's driving cost is the fact that the industry is also becoming extremely efficient. Just 10 years ago, we had the biggest turbines for wind were about 1 megawatt. Today we have machines that can produce about 5.4 megawatts of power. So we're talking about really significant changes in how technology is working, which is increasingly driving down the cost.
Very good news.
It's fantastic news, absolutely.
No, for sure. I'm sure all the numbers is the right numbers, and this is, as we said, this is the future. So it has to be that way. Technology needs to help in order to have always more competitive prices, and that's the way it should be. Of course, as we said, it is still very early. As we said, for instance, in Africa, we still need a lot of energy to develop all the countries. Therefore, the need of energy will still require development of gas for sure, and for in the next decades. And again, also the stability is there. On the other side, when talking about a company, we are an energy company, we are not anymore an oil and gas company, which means we are also moving into renewables is fundamental. That's the future for everybody, it's absolutely. So again, we said it many times today, it's a mix. We need a mix to bring the world actually in a better energy world, but it takes time. Unfortunately, it would be, I said, where is Mr. Leonardo da Vinci who comes in 5 seconds to solve the problem, but still we didn't find it.
So, the talk about stranded assets, in my view, I think it presents both an opportunity and a threat to African countries, right? So, in the sense that if you know how energy systems work, you cannot depend on one source of energy generation, because even if it's wind power, what happens when the winds are not blowing? You need a backstop. If it's solar, what happens in the night if you don't have enough batteries to be able to store the power? So the point is that, so that's what I said initially, that what's the policy choice for developing countries who are energy deficient and need more power to develop? The most efficient approach is utilize all the resources you have. Africa is blessed with solar power. At the same time, if we are also blessed with gas power, let us develop all of them. I think that is the safest strategy rather than countries choosing which ones I want to develop. Because in Ghana, for instance, we relied so many years on hydro. And now with climate change, our dams are drying up, and then we had a Doomsday crisis. And then all of a sudden, we're like, whoa, now we need to do something. So my point is that it is important for countries to think on the renewable side, but let us, as low-income countries, let us not easily jump on the bandwagon thinking that these are going to be the game changer instantaneously, because a lot of the developments or estimates on the renewable sides are projections, right? And usually, and I've done some of these projections before, you create a lot of scenarios, the most optimistic scenario and the pessimistic scenario. And there's a lot of uncertainties also, even in the pricing development. 10 years ago, the cost of solar was really high. Now, advances in technology has made the price drop. A lot of things are going on. So, my key takeaway is that countries need to take advantage of the resources they have. At the same time, let us think about the climate. We shouldn't overpollute the climate, but we shouldn't be pitching ourselves against whether I am for A or I'm for X. Look at the resources you have, make very good use of it, and develop your country.
Thank you very much. Please, we would ask you to ask your questions via slido.com. You can go to slido.com to ask your questions. When you select slido.com, you join the event and then you put in this code. The code is #56046.
Again?
So you, on your webpage, put in slido.com. Slido, SLIDO.com. I think it's projected here. And then you join the event. Once you join the event, they will ask you for your code. The code is #56046. #56046. Because we'll be moving straight into the questions from the audience after the last set of questions. So we need you to ask your questions on slido.com. Now, I like your point about countries balancing the various energy sources. Have the right balance based on the resources that you have. If you look at the US, for instance, we have different states with different resources. A state like Oklahoma has oil and gas, and so they are huge on their oil and gas for power generation as compared to renewables. If you go to a state like Seattle, well, they also are more for renewables than the oil and gas. So it means that for Africa, we have to, based on our resources, decide exactly what we want to do. Now we have abundant oil and gas resources, and we have seen from the policy objectives of many African countries, including governments, that they want to power their economies through the oil and gas industry. So my question is, how do we ensure that the world does not wait too long for us to catch up on renewables and climate change issues? The world is moving on. We have seen that there have been meetings about, protecting the environment, climate change issues. We've heard a lot about this, but Africa has always been late on a lot of global agenda. So the question for the panel is, how do we make sure African countries have policies to, use the oil and gas to power industry for economic growth and development? Now, how do we make sure that we are not late in the discussion around sustainable energy, climate change, etc.?
Thank you, Pauline. I think another great question. And what is interesting, I think, for me in Africa is that I think we're probably facing a different challenge compared to, say, Western countries. We don't have to phase out coal, for example. And so what we need to do is really to modernize our energy systems, so really clean plate almost in most countries, and then expand them. So the critical question I guess we need to ask, so we're not too late, is how do we modernize? What do we choose to use to do that? What are the technologies of the future? Which technologies are going to allow us to power this industrialization and create jobs? We know that 700 million Africans are still using dirty fuels for cooking, which has a serious health impact on women and children. So it's not really just about the climate change discussion, it's not just about economic growth, it's also about enhancing people's livelihoods. And those are the kind of questions I think we need to be asking to make sure that this agenda is kind of at the top of people's minds, in the sense that the quicker we're able to make this transition, the better, really, all round, not just from an environmental perspective, but really around other critical issues around health, job creation, creating new skills for the future, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, and I would add that it's how do we do it? I believe strongly that it's our duty. When I say our duty, I mean all stakeholders. So, company needs to invest. Government needs to support. And it's something which has to happen. It is already happening. It has to be more and more and more. So we really need to make partnerships between public and private and keep going in this direction faster and faster. That I believe is the only way. But we all need to be responsible. I say all I particularly talk about the major company. And again, I see that in the market, most of the energy companies are doing this. We are doing it strongly. I would say that I'm very proud. DNI started a few years ago, and nowadays we talk more about agriculture than production, gas production. Actually, even just to pick up your thoughts as well. And it's the whole development environment that has to change. We need to optimize everything. For instance, agriculture. We have now launched a project in Ghana where we need to improve the yield in agriculture as well, because there will be less energy consumption, will be more benefit for the people. So it's all a change. And I mean, just to give you the example, the project we are launching now, we will do it now in November, has nothing to do with the petroleum agreement or anything else. It's just an initiative which we have done out of any commitment which we have. I believe it's the right way to move on. And the same is for any source of energy. One of the points which Justice was saying before, I think is very important, because we also need to look at countries not as countries, but as regions. There must be synergy. As you said, it's not a free cost to have, but that's the way it should be. There must be, I don't know, gas pipe moving from one country to the other. Energy cannot be closed in a place. When you create unbalance, physics teaches that they don't work. The system tends to balance. So we need to support this, otherwise it will be a mess.
about Africa being late, I think what we are very late at, it's eradicating poverty. I mean, the entire world has moved on, but we are still stuck with poverty. So if it's something that I'm very passionate about, we not being late again, it's about doing the right things to eradicate poverty. But anyway, on a more substantive issue, and I can re-echo his point, that first of all, we need to adopt technology, right? I mean, in every aspect of society, technology needs to be leveraged. But I also, at the same time, I also don't want our development policy to be like running a horse race, that this guy is adopting this, so let me just adopt this just for the PR propaganda, or a country is also doing this. We need to get the right policies done. Without the economic fundamentals, you can adopt different things, but after a year or two of implementation, they will collapse because the fundamentals are weak.
So how do we get the fundamentals right? How do we get the right policies done?
I think it's first of all, it starts with governance. And I maintain that it is not that Africa does not have the human capital to do it. It has to do with the willpower of our politicians, the willpower of our people to elect the right sort of people. So he talked about investment. The reason why a company may choose to go to country X and not go to country B is that the regulations are struggling in private sector development. So if I have to, go through several informal meetings in people's houses just to be able to get approval, and the other person it's telling me I have an open arm. And again, let us not be naive and think that, oh, we are the only country that can do X. Other countries have the same capabilities. They are chasing the same FDI that we are chasing. We need to get the fundamentals right. So for me, to cut the story short, it's not about a race. But for me, the most important thing is setting the fundamentals right. Once we have the fundamentals right, even if we start late, we'll be able to sustain it. Because, and I see it in Ghana, we are easy to sign up into something new. After a year or two, it collapses, and then we are looking for something new. Because the fundamentals are weak.
So my last question, and then I'll open up to everybody. We are talking about setting the fundamentals right. So I'm coming back to you again, Justice. We already have policies in place, right? Which we think, so from what you are saying, the fundamentals for those policies are wrong. So how do we move on from here? How do we get things done better? And please, any of you can also support.
Good question. Yeah. Again, I speak for myself, not for my organization. And I speak as a passionate Ghanaian and an African. I think that, so your question was how do we get it right? I think we need a workable plan. So it is difficult. Governance is difficult. It is even a two-person family. It is difficult to make the choices for your kids, right? How much more governing a country of 20 million, 30 million, 180 million. Without a strategic plan, there's no way you'll be able to do it. Now, I'm not referring to the plans that we do and they sit on bookshelf. I'm referring to plans that are actionable. I use the case of Ghana. We develop almost every time we have certain strategies and then usually what you see when there's a change of government, we start doing everything all over again. I think that what we need to do as a people, and that's why agencies or organizations like ACEP is important, to always bring an awakening on the people, on the policymakers, that let us look at the fundamentals. Are we setting the right fundamentals that regardless of whoever is in power, the system will run? What we have in many African countries, the system runs when a particular person is in power. But when that person is no longer there, the system doesn't run efficiently. That is what we need to do, getting the system to run regardless of whoever is in power.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to probably just second exactly what you said. We have to get the fundamentals right from a policy perspective. We need to make the investment climate much more friendly. Just talking from my own perspective as a renewables company, we develop projects across Africa. In 4 short years, we've been able to create a portfolio of a gigawatt of megawatts. which means that it is possible and it can take a short time. Just recently, we've closed a 250 megawatt project in Egypt. They've kind of got their policies sorted out. They know what they want to do. They help you find the sites, and so it's much easier to go through that process. But the leadership needs to come from the top. You know, investors are just ready. We're ready to come into Ghana. We're ready to come and deliver. But you know, the fundamentals absolutely have to be right. And nothing more to add. I think the buck really does stop with the politicians, unfortunately for us.
Of course, the environment is fundamental, but I want to give you news. ENI is working in 15 countries in Africa. Do you know which is the most difficult country? We're working, you won't believe it, Italy. I'm telling you. Otherwise, the Italian government will kill me. No, but it's true. I mean, you know, I don't want to talk about Italy, of course, but you know, when we deal with government politics, of course, it's not easy. As you said, even in the house with your wife and your husband, it's difficult to take a decision about children and so on. So we know that we are managing complex systems. They are complex. There is nothing we can do. Of course, legislation, policies, these help a lot. The environment, as you said, otherwise a company will decide to go somewhere else. But it's, I would say it's part of the game. We are part of the game, so we need to support the government to make it easier. We are also trying to do it. Yesterday we were together with my colleagues in the ministry to try to make things good for everybody. So if there are things which we can improve, we have to do it. Of course, you will never find a place where when you go in, it's perfect, whatever you happen, everybody, it's not going to happen. And again, I'm telling you, for instance, ENI is an Italian company, and for us, the most difficult place to work is Italy. Unbelievable.
Great, thank you, panelists. Now I'll open up for questions from the audience. Please, if anybody has questions for the panelists on any issue at all, please show by hand and then we'll call you. Yes, I'd like to give numbers. So, okay, 1, Dr. Abdurrahman, 2, somebody from the back, 2 people from the back, 3, 4.
What about the questions we put on Slido?
Yes, and then the questions that we put on Slido, so we can ask those questions. So please project the questions from. Okay, so let's start with the first. Ikao. Please,
Thank you. I think just listening to, especially Justice, you talked about the need for industrialization. I'd be keen to hear from you if you've looked at the cost of help. Because we're always saying, let's industrialize. Let's just put the numbers out there about industrialization. But we've also seen, take for example South Africa, there's a report that indicates the need to create all this energy. I should then take into account the cost to help. And the cost, the amount of money that they're spending on help from the coal industry is almost 4 or 5 times more than they're making from the coal. So it would be very interesting to hear from you if there's work that you've done from your research that looks at all this need for energy for industrialization, but also the costs to help and loss of livelihoods.
Dr. Abdurrahman.
I've already asked the question. I've already asked the question. Do you want me to answer that question? Okay. I need to ask you to differentiate between the discoveries offshore and onshore and their size, and about the utilization of gas by introducing gas cities, gas industrial cities. Thank you.
Can you please come again? Can you please repeat the question?
I asked 2 questions. One is that there is a differentiation between gas which is discovered onshore and offshore, and also the size of discovery. As in relation, I didn't want to mention that, in relation to the ACEP, you said abandonment. And the second question is that primarily sometimes you need to introduce the concepts of industrial cities on gas discoveries, especially onshore. Thank you.
So we had some 2 questions from the back.
do we navigate? Ghana currently has excess capacity. And so how do we balance the equation of having excess capacity and at the same time investing in other sources of energy? Some bit of education will help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll take this set of questions and then we'll read the next set from Slido. So the first question is to Justice. We are talking about industrialization. It is good to talk about it, but it also has certain costs to it. Cost to people's health, cost to livelihood. So what do you have to say about that? How do we balance industrialization with the cost that it comes with as relates to health?
So that's an interesting question. And so part of it, personally, I have not done research on that, but I've read a couple of papers. Frankly, coal is one of the most polluting sources of energy, and China is suffering from it. In Beijing, there's a lot of fumes. But you raise an interesting point, a policy question, right? So, on one hand, we want to industrialize. On the other hand, we also know that it comes with environmental and health costs. It raises a question of, do you want to eat? Because sometimes if you eat, the food itself can give you diseases, right? It's a tough question. But, my personal opinion is that we still need to do it. But doing it and making sure that the revenue we get, we invest into quality health care. Also, we also need to put regulations in place to ensure that the private companies that are polluting adopt technologies that reduce the environmental footprints of the activities, right? You cannot allow a company to site in a place and just pollute and get a profit and move away. Unfortunately, I just broke something, but that's fine. So, and it goes back to having the right policies and making sure that the regulations bite when it needs to bite, release when it needs to release. And I think that's the way forward.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like Jennifer to answer the question about balancing excess capacity with investing in renewables. We have too much capacity already, and we are also proposing for us to invest in renewables. So how do we balance the two?
I think the Ghana question is an interesting one, given the excess capacity that we have in the system. And I think rightly so, what the government has done actually at the moment is to pause and take stock. And I guess a critical question is looking at, what's the current energy mix? And I think strategically the government needs to decide what is the future and what does that look like, and how do we see renewables fitting into that? We understand that there's an integrated master power plan that's been prepared by the government, and I think that's what's going to guide us going forward as to which point the government sees an injection of renewables into that system. Obviously, we continue to push for the fact that renewables are much cheaper than conventional power, and so we believe that there's a way that you can balance this, but the most important thing is actually to take stock and plan ahead, because the other thing really with the energy sector is that a lot of these decisions have long-term implications, So if we decide to go ahead on a different trajectory now, it means that's the kind of power that we'll have in the next couple of decades in the system. So, I think the main thing is really the fact that they've paused and they're taking stock now and calling in power producers to really look at existing contracts and see where potentially it might make sense for them to go a different route. But strongly believe that there's still a role for renewables to play in Ghana's energy mix.
Thank you so much. So Roberto, you answered the question about differentiating between onshore gas and offshore gas and the size of that, so you can limit yourself to Ghana.
So this is a quite wide question. Okay, I'm not sure if you want to have the difference between technically or economically, but I'll try to answer.
Utilization.
Sorry?
Utilization.
Utilization of gas.
Well, utilization is the same. It doesn't really change. If it's onshore or offshore, the utilization by itself it's the same. Of course, the investments are different. That's for sure. Onshore gas is much cheaper than offshore gas. Just to give you an idea, the gas we have in Ghana, it's the only deep offshore non-associated gas in Africa. It's not common, it's true. So, of course, there is a difference between offshore, deep offshore, and onshore. But that's only the difficulties in developing the field. Then the rest of the chain is the same, it doesn't change much. Not sure I answered your question.
Okay, thank you very much. Roberto, there's another question here for you on Slido. So, there's a question that goes, why is ENI not building an integrated gas-to-power project in Ghana as they did in other countries?
Very simple. Because we have extra capacity, otherwise we would have done it. To build another plant, it doesn't really make sense.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this other question will go to Jennifer. The question is renewable energy capable of supporting base load? And maybe Justice can also make his comments.
Obviously, due to the variability nature of renewables, currently the answer is probably no. But a lot of advanced research is ongoing in this area. We know, for example, Tesla have developed some wind farms. I think there's one in the UK where currently they've already installed battery storage. We ourselves are working on a project in Senegal where we'll be able to store some of the power that we produce. So again, it's really about the pace of change. Maybe in the next 5 years, we will be able to answer that question as yes. But currently, we would need to have other sources of power as baseload.
I think she's answered the question, so I'll pause.
Okay.
I would like to add something about the pollution and so on. One of the things which probably, all energy company has to do, we are doing it, we are very proud of this, is, for instance, all investment in forestry. Because besides the way you produce energy, you need also to offset emissions. And so this is we have few projects coming out in Mozambique, in Angola, in Congo, in Ghana as well. We are discussing with the ministry in order to reduce our.
Thank you very much. There's also another question here. I think any of you can answer, or all of you can answer this question. What can incentivize political leadership in African countries to think whether, So there was a question about what can incentivize African countries, the leaders in African countries, to think long term. What can incentivize them? Because we keep talking about getting the fundamentals right, and we have also spoken about having a strategic plan. So what would then make them willing to do just that?
I think the biggest incentive to politicians is electorate, right? So 2020 is coming, they will go into the polls. If citizens, and the easiest way citizens can demonstrate their preference to politicians is through their votes. That's the only way. But other than that, institutions, think tanks like ACEP and all the other think tanks around can also, trumpet the voice of good hope that, look, let's do A, B, C, D. But the most important one is the elections.
No, I was going to echo the same. Actually, I was going to give an example of my country, Kenya, where recently the government had proposed to build 1,000 megawatts of coal down in Lamu, the coast. And civil society stood up and just said no. There was a lot of demonstrations around it, and the governments actually had to shelve those proposals. So I think increasingly, and thanks to ACEP for being part of this agenda, we do need many stakeholders raising their voices, and in particular the electorate. I think, sometimes we assume that people don't understand these issues. It was interesting for me, I'm from Kenya, living in Ghana. And sometimes when I'm riding in Uber, there's all these very interesting discussions about energy. And my own taxi driver really understands, what is going on. And I would like to echo what Madam Rosalind said at the beginning. At the end of this, we'll be able to come out with something that when we put it out there, we help people understand, the complex issues, but I think we have a role also to break it down so that we call it Wanjiko, is the ordinary person out there to understand what we're talking about so that they can push for change.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would just add that, as I said before, a lot of responsibility is also on the company. Even we are very close to the governments. We have an impact on the country, so we need to propose good things. This is a duty and a responsibility which energy companies should have to fulfill.
Great. So the questions on Slido, I think, are exhausted because they are fairly similar questions. I think we are right on time, and I wouldn't want to take much of your time again. I want us to be on time, so please, I would like to hand over the mic to the facilitator, but I know that rapporteurs have taken the key points, but the key takeaway for me is that African countries must do what works best for them. We have various sources of energy, we have various sources of power. We should do what works best for us. And we should also ensure that we have a strategy in place, and that strategy should be long-term. So basically, this is what I get from it, but I don't know if you guys have anything more to say. Do you? That's it.
I guess for me, just to conclude, as I said at the beginning, I think the trajectory is clear. I think smart money is moving away from fossil fuels generally, to renewables, which is very exciting from where I'm sitting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much again. Yes, let's balance, we need to balance the world, not only African countries, that's in terms of energy, of course. So we need to give access to everybody in a good price and in a sustainable way. That's the way it should be.
I would say that as we look at the generation side, we shouldn't think it's the magic bullet. We should make sure we solve the issues in the distribution side also.
Thank you very much. On this note, please give a round for the panelists. Thank you so much for listening to us.
Thank you so much, Ms. Pauline Anneman and your esteemed panel for doing justice to this topic. As you can see, ACEP has put together a program that deals with the issues, the pertinent issues that we need to be considering for the next couple of days. The first panel discussed industrialization, energy for industrialization, whether it was feasible. It was led by our own chairperson for today. This panel has looked at energy independence and innovation, how that can be done, whether that is possible. One of the key takeaways for me is the issue about governance. That seems to be the thread that is running through this morning. Someone said, well, governance, elections are the way to ensure that politicians behave the way they need to behave. But there's the other side, which is that elections also make politicians think short term because they're only thinking of the 4-year or the 5-year cycle. So where do you draw the line? I don't know. Perhaps we will find an answer by the time we get to this, get to the end of the program tomorrow. But the key important thing for us to take away is that it is not about the race. I think I like that. I like that for African countries, it's not just about racing to do what other countries are doing. It's just about looking at our own resources and deciding how best we can strategically optimize those resources for our development. We're just about to go to lunch now. We have an hour. When we come back from lunch, we are going to continue on the same trajectory that we started this morning on powering Africa. We've spoken about industrialization, we've spoken about independence, innovation. After lunch, we are going to talk about investment and security. Do we have the money to ensure this happens? And if we have the money to ensure this happens, how do we ensure that we have the right infrastructure in place? How do we ensure that that infrastructure is secure? So that is what you're going to come back from lunch to. I think lunch is served outside, is usually served outside the garden, I believe. And lunch is an hour. I'm hoping that we can claw back some of the time that we lost this morning. So if we can go to lunch now and come back in an hour's time, it's exactly 1:15 on my time, and we should be back from lunch by 2:15, so that we can quickly go at a canter and go through our program for this afternoon. Thank you. you.